Thanks for introduction and thanks for having me. I will present a paper um, from McLean's writings about love, his image about love. But before of this, I want to present some information about George McLean. He lived between 1929 and 2016, and he was a professor emeritus at the Catholic University of America. He was born, as I said, in 1929 in the United States of America, where he also graduated from his school. He then obtained a degree in theology from the Gregorian University of Rome. After studying philosophy for 3 years and theology for 4 years, he returned to USA for a doctoral program at the Catholic University of America, where he wrote a dissertation on the theology and philosophy of Paul Tillich. His academic and research activity began in the summer of 1960 and ended shortly before his death. He had a successful teaching career, and at the same time he held several management positions in several world philosophy institutions. In 1983, he founded the Council for Research in Values and Philosophy. By 2019, Council for Research in Values and Philosophy has published over 150 volumes that have reached more than 350 libraries at universities around the world. Many of these materials are posted on the organization website. You can access it at www.crup.org. Most of the books written by George F. McLean can also be accessed at this address. Also, I want to add that he was a kind of unofficial counselor of Saint Paul, Pope Saint Paul II, and also he studied with Paul Ricoeur. He was a friend with Dr. Gadamer, and he had very, very strong relations with the scholars. But also he was a very, very modest and very humble person. And he was very appreciated for this, and he worked a lot for people and for other, for students especially. And he organized hundreds of conferences all over the world, and he facilitated the communication between scholars from different cultures and religions. So I want to present my paper to share with you my ideas from his writings. So the title is The Value of Love in Terms of Ontological, Epistemological, and Social Harmony in George McLean's writings. In George McLean's writings, we find an original approach by which he relates to love, especially in a way he understands the nature of love and its role in the extension, in the existence of a person or social communities. Being a phenomenologist, and on the other hand, on the other hand, having concern for concrete answers to existential dilemmas, McLean overcomes through his speech certain approach to this topic, encountering in theology or philosophical debates. For example, all through we find in his works some references to the four terms used in Greek for love. He is not concerned with certain semantic comparisons. nor can he refer to love as a motive for awaiting the most ardent feelings, as Descartes writes in writes of this feeling in The Passion of the Soul. MacLean avoid the utilitarian or instrumentalist model that focus only on the effects of love. Whether we are talking about a love of goodwill or lust, if we mention the distinction made by Descartes. And last but not least, MacLean is not concerned with the metaphysics of love, according to the model proposed by Ortega y Gasset, or by the duality of the human being manifested by the fundamental division between masculine or feminine present in the culture of love, as it's the Spanish philosopher wanted it. Yes, MacLean is also interested in humanity, in which the culture of love predominates. So he seeks love in areas of and themes where it seems to be less and less present, as a result of the tendency to hide values in public life and concern that are intended to prohibit the metaphysic and the expression of the sacred. Trying to provide an answer to these tendencies that encourage narcissistic individualism and foster the atomization of society, MacLean refers to love presenting its divine origin and its indispensable role both for personal formation and affirmation, and for the establishment and proper function of human communities. His argument in this regard is that reason, in its first and basic philosophical articulation, was religion, and MacLean believes that at the base of every culture are religious elements that are based on love, hope, and faith. In addition, the idea of ontological love is also presented in the mythological vision, where it all begins from the union of an earlier pair of gods, while all such pairs are descendants of the one original pair, earth and heaven. Further, the procreation of the gods proceeds from each of these pairs precisely as united in love. Thus, in the theme of love, the theme of love is very present in his writings, but in this paper we will refer to three major distinctions. First, love has an ontological character for him, by the nature of its source and divine manifestation, because God is love. Secondary, this is the factor that makes the context favorable to the epistemological experience, at the same time being a tool that facilitates knowledge. And thirdly, it is the ingredient without the social harmony cannot be achieved. MacLean is interested in this issue because he is concerned with some functional application that can make significant contribution to self-knowledge and self-affirmation, as well as to establish effective relationship between people from different culture or religion. So let's start with the ontological nature of love in MacLean's writings. The need to have an ontological vision of love is even expressed by the common sense remark, "I am also a man," which draw attention to the need for appreciation, respect, support, or protection. It is obvious that such a message has significance only in a dialogue between two people, not between a man and a robot. But we also get familiar to such dialogues that is not difficult to imagine, because we will see them more and more often in the future in our increasing digitalized world. Also, the fact that there are different ways of expressing love toward pets, a kind of protective love, towards nature, ineffable love, and towards personal car or other accessories, kind of instrumentalist love, to name just three examples, is also is another argument that requires this clarification of the ontological nature of love in an increasingly liquid society, and that makes it progressively difficult to distinguish between people and things. Although ontological love includes the three types of love mentioned above, it is much more than that. George McLean considers that there are three levels of manifestation of love: one between subject-object, the second between subject-subject, and the third between subject-being in a metaphysical horizon. He argues that these three levels are present in all cultures and religions, the last level being the one that determines the reports of the first two. In addition, another argument that McLean's makes in favor of the ontological nature of love is that of the Holy Trinity. One of the last occasion of which Father McLean publicly affirmed this conviction was at the Great Jubilee of the year 2000, when he attended the Metaphysic for the Third Millennial Conference in Rome, where he gave a presentation entitled Metaphysic and Culture, the Bridge to Religion. This theme of ontological love was developed by presenting the attributes of God, which in contrast to Aristotelian prime mover, indeed, does know and love us. God know and love us. By extension, this vertical relation through which divine love is transmitted to human beings can be achieved further and between people at the horizontal level. McLean develops this idea, in other words, being concerned with the way in which the contemporary man, who is living in an increasingly globalized world, understands the ontological nature of love. He believes that understanding this aspect helps the man of the third millennium to be an individual person and have personal rights without being individualistic, selfish, and antipathetic towards others. As creating out of love, they are unique to the degree of the divine love and the freedom with which they were created. Therefore, this ontological nature of love also carries a creative power that remains active as long as man remains in relation with the Creator God in the subject-object relationship. Thus, there is a reflection of God's creative love that is seen in a way of life which, with values and principles that are related to the rational structure of the mind and the visible and metaphysical reality. In other words, love in its ontological character points to what is visible, but at the same time transcends it in power and significance, referring to what Lonergan called it prior word. Although McLean does not use this prior word formula, he refers to this to the first form of love that man experienced at first in his direct relation with his Creator. This relationship is representative for what McLean calls subsistent love, and argues that it is a gift that deserves to be given. As Nelson Mandela said that people who hate must be taught to love, because when they were children, they did not hate, as we see children do not make the differences that adults make. McLean argues that we must rediscover this ontological love with which we come in the world, because it is part of our nature, but which we lose under the pressure of an existence marked by individualism and distancing. For McLean, ontological love is the backbone of his system of thought, and action, but it is also what gives him confidence in his theological philosophical project. This ontological view of love is transferred by McLean to his understanding of theology and philosophy, as Mamuka Dolidze remarked when she wrote about his life and work. Love is wisdom, and wisdom is love. What is the motto that we inherit for him? Everyone who knew him loved him and treated him as a close friend. This relationship between wisdom and love becomes very important if philosophy is seen as it was in origin in antiquity, and as Pierre Hadot rediscovered it to us. In fact, what McLean does is to enliven ancient philosophy through ontological love, which becomes a sacrificial love specific to Christianity. In this way, in a postmodern time when philosophy and theology are emptied of their relational and experimental nature, being pushed toward an analytical approach, McLean proposed another way of philosophing or doing theology that integrates people, persons, and culture in a metaphysical context and relates them to the one or to the creator. This is what characterizes his philosophical and theological approach, a concern for inclusion and not for exclusion or separation. This perspective is the personal novelty that Christianity brings to philosophy through the doctrine of the incarnation that upholds the unity between word and deeds according to the model, the Word made flesh, of love that has its origin in being and expresses the being. This is how McLean understands to unite the two dimensions of philosophy, the search for solutions through thinking and ideas, but at the same time assuming the ethical responsibility to implement them. What is proposed in the program of ancient thinkers through political philosophy is presented differently in the philosophy of the Christian religion through personal involvement and sacrificial love. In fact, McLean's love for theology and philosophy is a form of expression of his love for people as a result for understanding and assuming the ontological nature of love. But this truth of ontological love cannot be expressed and understood if the epistemological nature of love is not made visible, and also valuable. Love and epistemology. If we accept the ontological nature of love, the educational process must be viewed from this perspective, because the primordial act of love on his part regarding to God not only invites us to even forces us to respond to him with love, but represents, says McLean, the center of our life and the prime mover of our acts of knowledge. This is what Augustine puts it so beautiful. I have not first loved you, it is you who first loved me. A situation to which McLean refers to show that the moments of knowledge that offer meaning in life and not just informative notions take place in the context of love. Is the loss of this aspect of love the reason why in our society we are talking more and more about a failure of education, and why new pedagogical methods and educational strategies that are urgent expected to be adapted to children and young people? Should this be the reason why more and more educators are referring to emotional intelligence regarding to the development of relational skills and value qualities that define a person's desire to assume the professional training and moral training as well. Unfortunately, this period of pandemic has shown us once again that the relationship, especially supported by love, is indispensable, not only necessary for the educational process. It is not surprisingly that those who suffered the most in this month of medical crisis after the medical staff and those who were contaminated or lost a loved one were teachers, pupils, and students. There are very worrying statistics about the adverse impact that this medical crisis has had on children and young people who are now in their studies, but the most certain information about this situation is likely to come in the next month and years. Speaking about the role of loving in knowledge, McLean emphasized how important is the family's contribution in supporting the educational process. One who is raised in a loving and generous family will be more able and more liable to make room for love and generosity in one's interpretation and response to life, just as one who lives in a more calculating, manipulative, and exploitative environment is less likely to factor love into one's thinking. Therefore, MacLean refers to Aristotle's description of the wise man who is presented as the person who loves wisdom or the philosopher, as one capable of universal and difficult knowledge, of greater than ordinary certainty, of identifying causes, and of seeking knowledge for its own sake. This description shows us that the act of knowledge also requires a substantial emotional commitment of involvement and dedication through love, both by the one who wants to learn and by the one who is the teacher. In order to correct the deficiency mentioned above, to fulfill the pedagogical objectives, to refresh the educational system, and to prepare young people for life, both professionally and morally, Joseph McLean supports the epistemological value of love. The model he proposes confirms that Goethe what has already stated very clear: we are shaped and fashioned by what we love. Therefore, we need to remember that remember what has been known for a long time, but it seems that it has been forgotten lately. Um, namely, that the process of knowing mediated by love is more efficient. In addition, such an educational experience makes the meeting between the two, teacher and learner, uh, take each to a higher level of knowledge and moral development. MacLean warns that this experience of education cannot take place, or it's partially lived in the if the second dimension of human personality is not developed, as Piaget argues. Um, the affective by which we respond to things with feelings and emotions, such an empty and love, or rejection and hate. This perspective is also argued by MacLean in a comprehensive article entitled The Person and Moral Growth, the Dynamic Interactions of Values and Virtues, published in Love as the Foundation of Moral Education and Character Development. MacLean not only supports the role of love in the educational process, but also practices this model. In the last work written to honor him, several authors noticed his preoccupation to transmit information in a context of love. I quote here only what Carlos Eduardo Maldonado wrote. What most struck me was his soft manner, his extremely gentle mood, the soft tone of voice, the peace he irradiated. All this combined with the extreme intelligence and an open-minded attitude, the close expression to wisdom ever. I never met a wise philosopher, professor as George McLean. All the other were clever and smart, no question about that. Some had a very refined sense of humor, um, and others were distant and rather indifferent to the world and surroundings. Nonetheless, up until today, I have never met anyone who combined knowledge and gentleness, erudition and kindness, intelligence and warmth so well. Um, I'm sure that every single person who had the chance to meet and come to know George McLean experiences something similar, even if they express it differently. Um, Thus, in addition to the ontological nature of love, McLean also reveals the epistemological function of love, but his ultimate goal is to put these two qualities together to help establish and develop the social harmony. Joseph McLean believes that the society of people who understand the ontological components of love and in which the process of education is mediated by love will be under the sign of harmony and unity. Social harmony appears in McLean's view when each individual begins to see life not only from the perspective of the responsibility to survive, but also as an opportunity to create and communicate through love and to express a transformative role for the good of the social community and the environment in which she or he lives. For this unity to be achieved through love, McLean argues each person in the community needs to be fully viewed, body, mind, and soul, independent, distinct, and unique, and recognized for their potential for change and communication with other people. When this relationship between the part and the whole, it's initiated without the social, initiated within the social group, being supported and regulated by love, each person is valued and the community lives an experience of harmony and unity that dynamically increases the potential of each individual in the community. Thus, a phenomenology of unity is achieved that can be defined as a state of well-being based on relationship in both directions, equally from the individual to society and vice versa, and this relationship between related to the divine. Unfortunately, McLean notes that the recent decades in the Western society there has been a process of alienation when the individualism and privacy take precedence over social experience and public space. He calls this phenomenon the bitter experience in our time with the so-called scientific view of history. Further, rationalists, captivated as they are by ration, have often forgotten the additional human dimension of affectivity, mutual concern, and love. In the same idea, Lonergan observes a growing presence of resentments of the society at the society level and considers that perhaps its worst feature in that that its rejection of one value involves a distortion of the whole scale of values, and that this distortion can spread through a whole class, a whole people, a whole epoch. The solution proposed by McLean for the restoration of social relations and the establishment of new communication channels is to rediscover the role that the imagination has in the construction of rational mechanism that include aesthetic aspects specific to each culture. But this approach must not lack love in order to be able to articulate particularities characteristic to some individuals or minority groups, and to avoid certainly tensions that may arise in a personal relationship or between smaller or larger social groups. Of course, such an approach also requires a great deal of concern for knowledge and a willingness to understand others. This is what McLean has done by traveling to all countries, visiting all continents, visiting dozens of countries, and organizing hundreds of conferences with thousands of participants. Professor McLean impressed with his universal love. Ouyang Kang confesses that I found that for Professor McLean, there is no divide among different cultures, religions, and ethics. He treated every culture, every country, and every people with the same love, which is a universal love. He organized many conferences in different countries and in different cultures. Um, but he treated all people and cultures equally. This is not easy to do, but Professor McLean was able to handle it. His spirit enlightened us here. The finally and the finality of the perspective that McLean opens when he has in attention this approach is being in love through a dialogue of love. A dialogue in which love is based on an ontological conception, achieves a favorable framework for knowledge and leads to unity and social harmony. In fact, here we have a definition of what it means in McLean's horizon, the idea that the relationship between people from different culture and religion be based on love. To have an approach that takes into account the qualities of being, to overcome new limits in the field of knowledge, and to contribute to the realization of communities that are not bothered by cultural or religious barriers and are not negatively influenced by technical process. When the ontological, epistemological, and social value of love are not preserved, the implications on a personal or social level are multiple. Some of them are in the table below. I will not insist on this table. I put in comparison
Yes, the time is
love,
over.
epistemological and love, epistemology without love, social harmony and love, and social harmony without love. And it may seem hard to imagine that there is such a love as described by McLean. But even in this time of pandemic, when we were saddened by some many difficult situations, there were people who have such love. Yes, they were negative facts with people who knew they were in contact with COVID-19 virus and did not say this. That's how we had hospitals and had to be closed because dozens of medical staff were infected with this with the new virus. We were outraged by those who rush into the stores and they made provisions on food without thinking about those who were at work or could not leave the house at certain intervals. Or what about those who have sought to take advantage of that lack of products in pharmacies or to offer services at very high prices just to get rich without thinking about the fact that so many people have lost their jobs or they had much dismissed incomes. And when the vaccines were authorized, another window of human vanity and disinterest is in fellow human beings opened. Preferential contracts were made, lists were written when some had more priority than others. Started again the talk about the poor and rich countries, or very reported situation, or what a reported situation with people who jumped the line to get the vaccine.
Excuse me,
However,
could you please go
there
to
were enough
conclusions?
positive example that showed that there is a spirit of solidarity, respect for fellow human beings, and a desire for social harmony manifested through gesture of love to the point of extreme sacrifice. During all this time, most of the medical staff worked until they were exhausted. There were many people who volunteered, especially to do certain services to those who were isolated or couldn't not move. There were impressive moments with people singing together from the balconies and from the windows of the apartments of or even from the hospitals. In addition to many other impressive situations, it was the a gesture of 72 years old priest Giuseppe Berardelli, who refused to be switched to artificial ventilation so that the ventilator could be used for a younger person. He died on March 15 last year at the hospital in Lovere, Bergamo, after refusing to be connected to medical equipment, which, according to the quoted source, was brought especially for him by the parishioners. In conclusion, this is the world we live in, and this was the world MacLean lived in. There will always be reasons to choose to wait to receive love or to be concerned with giving love. MacLean was primarily interested in understanding love as as it is offered by the one who is the source of love, a love with ontological value. Then he was interested that this love to create the context of epistemological experiences, and he did everything what was in his power to develop this social harmony by love, bringing together people from different cultures and religions. The article written about him in the last book pointed to honor him are incontestable testimonies of how he understood to communicate this ontological love, its epistemological potential, and its value for social harmony. I could even say that the way he understood love helped him find unlimited resources to fulfill his project and the many responsibilities he assumed, to be a professor emeritus and to be a factor of social harmony for people from different cultures and religions. If Kant is right in saying that to love is to do good, then MacLean has shown a love that complements his intellectual commitments to help philosophers around the world to engage in their own philosophical work. His life and person is a living testimony of the message written by the Romanian novelist Marin Preda. But where there is no love, there is nothing. And we could add, but where there is love, there is everything.